Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on time. We'll just probably wait a minute before we start. Thank you for being here. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Happy Reno. I am the Executive Director of BC Bereavement Helpline. I am very honored with our speaker for tonight's session, and thank you so much for joining us in this beautiful evening. Okay, let me just go ahead and make sure everybody's in the room now. Okay, I think we can start. All right. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you. That's good. So we are all gathered here to hear and learn about pet loss and grief. Before we dive into the conversation or the session, allow me to just acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the Surrey, BC. And so I acknowledge with deep gratitude that I live on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the shared lands of the Simiamu, Katsi, Kwantlen, and Tuasin First Nations. I invite you to take a moment and either in the chat or quietly in your heart to reflect on where you're joining us from and offer gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who have cared for the land since time immemorial. All right, so let me just quickly introduce ourselves. So we are BC Bereavement Helpline. We are a province-wide nonprofit that provides grief and loss support for people across BC. And we really appreciate your presence and your time joining us today. And we don't want to go on any other details, but I just want to dive into the conversation. I'm pretty sure you guys are excited. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. I'm very honored to be joined by Dawn Campbell, a registered social worker and veterinary social worker based in British Columbia. Dawn brings over a decade of experience in social services with a deep focus on grief and loss, trauma-informed care, and community outreach. In her role at the Vancouver Humane Society, Dawn supports low-income pet guardians through McVitie Veterinary Assistance Program, helping ensure access to care during times of vulnerability. She also runs a private practice specializing in pet loss, disenfranchised grief, and professional education. She is also one of our BCBH distinguished board members. And so without further ado, I'm very excited to share with you Dawn. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Ugh, thank you, Happy, for that introduction and for starting us off. I just want to confirm that everyone can see the screen that I'm sharing right now. I'm getting a few head nods. And so that's great. And I know that you guys have already been invited to share if voluntarily where you live. I'd also like to invite you to share in the chat possibly where who you're joining for. This could be maybe somebody who is going through pet loss that you're supporting. It could be yourself who has lost a pet. And so if you're wanting to, you can share the name of them in the chat, just so that we can really connect on a deeper level of why we're here today. And I know that Happy already did a really good introduction of me. And so I wanted to share a little bit of my personal experience with grief and loss. I've seemed to have a very deep relationship with it now. In recent years, I've experienced a number of personal losses, including the sudden loss of my dog, Reese. That's her in the photo there. I had her from the time she was 8 weeks old and until we had to say goodbye to her when she was 10. Her passing was unexpected, and a decision had to be made very quickly. And it was one of those moments you never imagine going to the vet and not bringing your pet home with you. And Reese wasn't just my dog. During that decade, I was living with my dad, and she became deeply bonded with him too. And so not only was I navigating my own grief, but I was also witnessing my dad's grief, which was incredibly hard. I had never seen my dad cry before, and that experience stayed with me. And I would say, like, saying goodbye to her was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The personal experience alongside my work with the Vancouver Humane Society, as Happy mentioned, and my previous work in social services on the downtown east side of Vancouver has shaped how I understand the human-animal bond. I've seen the depth of love people share with their animals, and I've also witnessed the depth of grief that follows. That brings me here today with you all, both lived experience and professional experience, and a deep respect for how meaningful these relationships are. And so just before we get into the session, I want to explain a little bit about what this is about today. So this is a psychoeducational webinar, which means the focus is on learning language and understanding pet grief through a trauma-informed and culturally safe lens. The intention is to raise awareness, reduce stigma, and recognize pet loss as a deeply meaningful and valid form of grief. The session isn't really designed to be highly interactive. However, you're very welcome to share reflections or thoughts in the chat, and you can place questions there at any time, and we'll come back to those towards the end. And Happy will be monitoring the chat as we go. You'll notice that some of the slides have more text than usual, and that's intentional. This presentation will be turned into a downloadable PDF resource on the BCBH website, so we wanted the information to live beyond today. In terms of participation, as I said, you're always invited to engage in the chat in whatever feels right for you, and personal sharing is completely optional. This session is for people who have experienced pet loss, those supporting someone who has, and also for social service workers, veterinary professionals, students, and helpers who want to better understand pet grief. And if you're looking for something more interactive, process-focused space, we'll be offering a pet loss support group this spring, and we'd love to have you join. And we'll have a little bit more information about that in the end. Now, I want to note here that as a content note and a gentle reminder that this session does discuss grief and loss and the death of companion animals. And these topics can be emotional and may connect to personal experiences. I'm going to try not to get teary-eyed on you guys, but this is very close to my heart. And I just want to invite you to please take care of yourself, step away at any time, get a glass of water, a warm drink. We're not going to have any time to take any breaks. And so just listen to yourself and what your body needs. If that means adjusting your space, then you're welcome to do that. And again, there's no expectation to share, and resources will be provided at the end. And some of the learning outcomes that we'll have by the end of this session is just understanding what pet loss grief is and that it's real, valid, and often misunderstood. And we're going to go into the emotional and neurobiological impact of pet loss. We're going to explore some models and cultural perspectives, and ideally increase confidence in supporting people experiencing pet loss, as well as reflect on the role of systems, access, and equity shaping grief. And I really wanted to share this before we move into the meat and potatoes of the webinar. And I wanted to express that when we talk about pet grief, it's important to remember that companion animals come in all shapes and sizes and species. Often when people hear the word pet, they picture a dog or a cat. But for many people, their closest companion animals might be rabbits, birds, reptiles, horses, or other species. And the depth of grief is determined by the type of animal. It's shaped by the relationship. It's about the bond, the shared routines, the sense of connection, and the role that animal played in someone's life. For one person, that might be a dog who walked beside them every day. For another, it might be a bird who greeted them every morning, or a reptile they cared for with deep attention and commitment. And so grief really reflects attachment, not species. And what matters most is the love that was there. So what is pet grief exactly? So pet grief is a natural response to attachment, loss, and disruption. When we love an animal, they're part of our daily rhythms, our routines, our sense of safety and connection. When they're gone, it's not just emotional, it's relational, practical, and sometimes even identity shifting. Research tells us that the loss of a companion animal can be experienced as intensely as the loss of a human loved one. And for many people, animals are sources of unconditional connection, comfort, and co-regulation, so the impact can run very deep. I know that when I had to say goodbye to my dog Reese, and as I mentioned, I'd experienced other losses around that time, and I felt this sense of guilt and shame around why is this hurting so much more than those other losses? Like I lost my mom, and yet this feels so much more painful. And it truly is because it is just as painful. You know, they provide, as I said, an unconditional connection and co-regulation. And then we also have to remember that grief is shaped by culture, community, and personal context. And there isn't one way to grieve an animal. There are many things that go into what that grief looks like. And so as I said, you know, this can be very difficult to talk about. And I wanted to bring this forward as there are many different ways that we may lose a companion animal. And so I've listed some of those ways. Um, some losses are sudden or accidental, and they've happened without warning, which has been my experience. Other losses are illness related or expected. So this may be an animal that's been living with a chronic or terminal illness. And then there's euthanasia, which is another form of loss. And this is a medically guided decision. And this is made to prevent any more suffering that they may be experiencing and comes with deep love. And as I said, that decision can come with guilt and doubt and moral pain. I also wanted to highlight that some people experience traumatic or violent loss, such as cruelty, accidents, or disasters. And this can bring elements of shock and trauma and unanswered questions. There's also losses through separation or relinquishment when people have to give up a pet because of housing, finances, safety concerns, or major life changes. These losses are often filled with grief and heartbreak, even though the animal is still alive. And some losses are tied to systemic barriers when lack of access to care, housing restrictions, or financial constraints shape the outcome. In these cases, grief may be compounded by injustice, guilt, and helplessness. And all of these are forms of loss. None of them are less than. And what matters is the relationship that existed. And these types of losses are really intertwined with the types of grief. And these are all the same types of grief that we see in other losses. And they take many forms, as mentioned before, the traumatic and sudden loss. I'm going to talk a little bit more about disenfranchised grief, anticipatory grief, and more euthanasia and moral distress. But these are some of the other ones. Ambiguous loss can be missing or rehomed pets. You know, sometimes we have an indoor outdoor cat and the cat doesn't come back one day. And that can leave a lot of unanswered questions. And it can bring a really weird type of mixed emotions with that grief. We also have complicated grief. And so this could be an intense feeling and compounded grief. And that's when many losses occur faster than one can process it. And so you may have experienced other losses in your life that are still very much at the surface, and then another thing happens. And that can be really hard to navigate. And as I said, I wanted to take a closer look at these three types of grief because they're incredibly nuanced. Disenfranchised grief isn't fully recognized or validated by others. People might hear comments like, it was just a pet, you can just get another one. Comments like that, which can minimize the depth of the bond and make it harder to grieve openly. And when grief isn't socially acknowledged, it can become more isolating and complicated. Anticipatory grief Begins before the pet has died. Often, when an animal is living with serious illness, aging, or decline, we move through these cycles of hope, fear, exhaustion, and heartbreak, sometimes all in the same day, and it can be emotionally draining to love while also preparing for loss. And again, that decision related distress, this is shaped by having to make a medical or end of life decision. Even when a decision is made from a place of deep love and care, people can feel guilt, doubt, or moral pain. And that's exactly what I felt. And I asked all of these same questions of, did I wait too long? Did I act too soon? Should I have gotten a second opinion? And those questions haunted me. Like I don't know how else to describe what I felt, but it was a really haunting feeling, these questions of, did I do the right thing? And it's important to really say clearly to yourself that these experiences are not signs of weakness or doing something wrong. These are signs of deep attachment, responsibility, and love, and they reflect how seriously people hold the well-being of their animals and the bond they've shared. Many people are surprised by how intense pet loss grief can feel and sometimes wonder, why does it hurt this much? Or even question themselves for the depth of their response, as I had shared before. And research helps us understand why. So, grieving a pet can activate the same brain regions involved in grieving a human loved one. The attachment system in our brain doesn't distinguish based on species, they respond to bond, safety, and connection. So, companion animals often provide constant unconditional presence. And as they're woven into our daily life, greeting us in the morning, sitting beside us at night, that steady companionship becomes a part of how people emotionally regulate and feel grounded. And so when we lose that, it's not just an emotional loss, it's a disruption to routines and the loss of a source of comfort and co-regulation. The home, the day, and even the body can feel different. And pet grief isn't about replacing an animal, it's about honoring the emotional space that they held and the relationship that existed. Understanding this helps us see pet loss as a profound human experience that deserves empathy, recognition, and care. And I just want to dive a little bit deeper about what happens in the brain exactly. And so when we lose a companion animal, our brain and nervous system respond in very real biological ways. And so as I stated, our attachment system activates. These are the same systems that respond to separation from people we love. The brain registers loss and disconnection, and then it can interpret that separation as a kind of threat to safety. And because of that, stress hormones increase, and that's the body's survival response. Not because you're in danger, but because your system is trying to understand a major disruption to connection and routine. And because pets are so deeply embedded in our daily lives, that presence being taken away can can create a disruption in our nervous system. And it can take a while for our nervous system to adjust to this this new normal. And so I think that, this helps explain why grief can feel overwhelming and that it's not just emotional. It's very much on a neurological level. And and it's about also why people often notice changes in concentration, sleep, appetite, or energy. The brain is working hard to process loss while also recalibrating. And shifting from biology to meaning, people are not pets are not just supports, they are relationships. And I'm really trying to drive that home, as I've said it a couple times. Um, they're present in our quiet, unfiltered moments. They witness parts of our lives other people don't see. And over time, they become a part of our identity. And for some people, cultural teachings frame animals as relatives, teachers, or sacred beings, deepening the relational and spiritual dimensions of the bond. So when a pet dies, people aren't just losing comfort or routine, they're losing a relationship, a role, and sometimes a piece of how they understand themselves. And that was very similar to my experiences. Who am I without her? Who am I without Reese? She was there throughout my in my 20s. which were some hard times. And she witnessed things that nobody ever witnessed me go through. And she was very much a part of my identity. And so it can really be shaking to find who you are now with a different relationship with them. And I wanted to touch on some grief models. There are many ways professionals have tried to understand grief, and these models aren't meant to tell us how grief should look. They're more so tools or lenses that help us make sense of different experiences. And you may be familiar with the stages of grief. And these stages were originally developed to describe the experience of people facing terminal illness, not bereavement specifically, but they may sound familiar. It's denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and that has helped people in many ways understand what they're feeling. But there's other models also. There's the continuing bonds model, and this offers a bit of a different experience perspective. Rather than focusing on letting go, it recognizes that people often maintain an internal relationship with the person or animal who died through memories and rituals and a sense of ongoing connection. And this can be a healthy part of adapting to loss. And now there's the warden's tasks of mourning, and this frames grief as a process of adjustment. It focuses on how people come to accept the reality of the loss, experience the pain, adjust to life without the person or animal in a practical and emotional sense, and finding ways to carry the bond forward. And as well with meaning construction, it highlights how loss can disrupt our sense of identity and worldview, and grieving often involves rebuilding meaning and figure out who we are now and how this loss fits into our life story. And that's what I like a lot about the last three of these theories is that it's not saying that you need to let go. It's not saying move on, right? It's saying that, hey, like this was a part of you and this relationship is still there. It's just in a different form. And that it's okay to honor them years after even. And and again, like these models remind us that grief is very complex and personal and shaped by the relationship, context, and culture. And I wanted to share a holistic perspective on healing that is reflected in many Indigenous teachings, often represented through the medicine wheel. I share this with respect, recognizing that there are many nations, teachings, and interpretations, and this is not meant to represent any one specific tradition. The medicine wheel helps us understand wellness as balance and interconnectedness and caring for the spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental parts of ourselves. Rather than seeing these as separate, this perspective reminds us that each aspect influences the others. Grief touches all parts of these. It can affect the body through fatigue or changes in sleep, like I had said earlier, the mind through concentration and meaning making, the emotions through waves of sorrow or longing, and the spirit through questions of connection, purpose, and relationship. And healing in this view is not about fixing grief or moving past it quickly. It's about tending to each of these areas with care and doing so in relationship with community, with the land, and with the supports around us. There isn't a single right way to grieve. Just as people move through the circle in their own way, each grief journey has its own rhythm, needs, and teachings. And I would say that for adjusting to painful reminders and new routines, this was one of the ones that I struggled with the most. You could be at home relaxing and you look over to their spot where they used to be and you're like, why aren't they not there? I remember a year later finding her hair in my carpet, just like these reminders that she's still here, but she's not. And having to adjust to that can be very hard. And then as well, because I mean, for myself, going out to the park and getting to know other people with their pets, like having them in your life can create this sense of community with other people. And then now without them, having to adjust to a new routine, and what does that look like? And so it's not just about like the loss of them, it's everything that they meant, right? It's all of these other pieces that are attached to them. And these reminders can feel like big heartbreaks throughout the day. And when we lose a pet, we don't just lose their presence, we lose our routines, our sense of familiarity, our plans, and sometimes what may feel like our purpose. And it's normal to feel disoriented, unmotivated, or disconnected. You might get frustrated with yourself for not being able to get back to normal, but please know it's okay to not be okay right now. And I think that, another layer to grief, and especially pet loss and pet grief, is that systems can really shape this loss. And grief doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's shaped by the social and economic conditions people are living in and by their access to care and support. So for many people, caring for an animal companion involves navigating financial, housing, or systemic barriers. Veterinary care can be expensive. Pet-friendly housing can be hard to find. Transportation, access to clinics, and supportive services aren't equally available to everyone. When resources aren't there, grief can become more complicated. People may carry feelings of guilt, injustice, or helplessness, not because they didn't love their animal, but because systems didn't provide the support they needed. We also know that grief is often compounded for people who are already facing marginalization. This can include people living in poverty or homelessness, Indigenous and racialized communities, seniors, people with disabilities, and survivors fleeing from violence who may be forced to choose between safety and staying with their pets. In these situations, pet loss isn't just a personal experience, it's shaped by broader systems. And recognizing this helps shift focus away from individual blame and towards understanding, compassion, and the need for more inclusive supports. Grief in these contexts often reflect deep love, responsibility, and the difficult realities people are navigating. I also wanted to name something that often is invisible but deeply felt by people working in animal welfare, veterinary settings, and social services connected to animals. Moral distress happens when we know what compassionate care looks like, but systems, policies, or limited resources prevent us from acting in the way we believe is right. In this field, that can show up in many ways. It can be having limited funds and having to decide who can receive support and who can't. It can be it can be being part of the end of life decision, including euthanasia, when there are no other options. It can be witnessing suffering and feeling powerless to change the broader circumstances that led to it. These experiences don't just affect us in the moment. Over time, repeated exposure to pain, loss, and ethical tension can contribute to compassion fatigue, emotional and physical exhaustion that comes from caring deeply in difficult conditions. And naming moral distress is important because it helps shift the story away from personal failure. These feelings are often a response to systemic constraints, not a lack of skill, commitment, or compassion. And for those who do this work, your reactions make sense. They reflect the depth of your care and the weight of the realities you hold. And so as we move into, areas of support and what can be very important, these are the 5 key areas that have been identified across the board, not just in pet loss, but also in other losses. And so maybe these have been seen before by you guys. This is what I've touched on throughout the webinar. And I think that they're very important, not just about the emotional, but also the social piece, the meaning making piece, the professional piece, and ensuring that these areas are supported in some way or another if you need it. And for those of us in helping roles, whether that is in your work or if it is a loved one who is going through the loss of a pet, understanding pet grief changes how we show up. When we recognize the legitimacy of pet loss, we reduce the risk of minimizing someone's experience. Even subtle messages like shifting quickly to problem solving or comparing the loss to something bigger can unintentionally invalidate the depth of the bond. Understanding pet grief also helps us avoid pathologizing natural responses. Intense sadness, ongoing attachment, or difficulty adjusting aren't necessarily signs something is wrong. They're often signs of love, attachment, and disruption. These perspectives support responding. This perspective supports responding with compassion rather than urgency. Instead of trying to move someone through grief faster, we can create space for it and listen and acknowledge the relationship that existed. From a practice standpoint, this supports ethical trauma-informed care, and it strengthens trust and safety in helping relationships with people feel when people feel their loss is seen and respected. And so I wanted to go over, a little bit of like what helps and maybe what doesn't help. Um, Simple words like this matters helps counter the ways pet loss is often minimized. Listening without trying to fix the grief is key. Respecting the person's pace, honoring their meaning making, and recognize that systemic barriers or difficult decisions may add extra layers of distress. And even well-intentioned helpers can slip into pitfalls, comparing losses, rushing meaning, offering quick fixes, or avoiding the topic. These responses can unintentionally minimize grief and create distance. Support is most helpful when it's patient, curious, and compassionate. Being willing to sit with someone in their grief rather than trying to move them out of it is probably the best way to show up for somebody. And we've talked about different grief models and concepts, and those can be very helpful in understanding what's happening. But at the end of the day, whether you're the one grieving or you're supporting someone who is, this might be the simplest way to think about it. Grief doesn't necessarily shrink over time. The love, the bond, and the loss doesn't just get smaller or disappear. Instead, many people find that they grow around their grief. Life slowly begins to make space again for moments of comfort, connection, even joy. And while the grief still exists, both can live side by side. The heart doesn't go back to the way it was, but it can stretch. It can hold both the pain of the loss and new experiences at the same time. So healing isn't about getting over it. It's about learning to carry the grief as part of your story while life gradually grows bigger around it. And as we near the end of our time, I wanted to touch on some rituals and tributes, and I would welcome anyone in that wants to put in the chat anything that they have found has helped them honor their lost companion animal. Rituals can be an important part of grief. They help us make meaning and express love and maintain connection with our companion animals we've lost. These acts can be very simple or deeply personal. It can be like lighting a candle or keeping a collar, creating a photo space, planting something, or speaking their name or marking an anniversary. Rituals can also be cultural or spiritual. Again, there's no single right way. Just as there's no single right way to grieve, there's no single right way to honor a companion. What matters is that it feels meaning to the person who's grieving. Rituals don't take the grief away. Instead, they give it form. And this gives us a way to express the love that still exists and to carry the relationship forward in a different way. And with that being said, I wanted to share a few personal examples of what rituals and tributes can look like. And so as I've shared a little bit about my dog, Reese, I she wanted to share how I have honored her memory and kept her memory alive inside of me. After Reese died, I found myself holding on to small, tangible pieces of our relationship, such as her paw print and photos. And I still have her collar, her first collar from when she was a puppy when I got her. And I have an urn with her name on it. And these aren't just objects, they're ways of keeping the relationship present in a new form. And for me, these tributes help give shape to the grief, and they gave me a way to continue the bond, not erase the loss, but to honor the life we shared. And there's no right way to do this. What matters is what feels meaningful to you. And so, as you can see some of these pictures, I had a photo shoot done with her that same year that I lost her, and I have a ton of these photos framed and hanging on my wall. I look like the most self-absorbed person because they're all just pictures of me and my dog. But, um, and on here I painted a birdhouse and brought it to this park that's called Fairy Forest. And it's very magical, and a lot of people put birdhouses there. There's a picture, one of those pictures shares that there's birdhouses scattered everywhere. It was the last place that I had taken her for a walk before she got really sick. And so I made a little birdhouse in memory of her, and I put it there. And you can see like there are other ones there where people have written who they're honoring, or kids, children just paint birdhouses and bring them there. And so it's quite a magical place. And I know that different communities have formal and informal ways of doing this. And then as well, you can do this at home. And I think like what is most important is that grief doesn't follow a straight line. There's no set timeline for grief. Some days might feel lighter, and others can feel just as heavy as the beginning. That doesn't mean someone is going backward. It's simply how grief moves. And grief often comes in waves. Sorrow and moments of peace can exist at the same time. It's possible to laugh, rest, or feel okay for a moment and still deeply miss the companion animal we've lost. And those experiences don't cancel each other out. And grief is not meant to be carried alone. Connection, community, and spaces where loss is recognized can make a meaningful difference. And grief reflects the deep depth of the bond. Healing is about finding ways to continue living while honoring that love. And I wanted to take a moment because I know that I mean, this was a lot of information that I threw at all of you very quickly. And I just wanted to take a moment before moving into any questions that people may have, just to ground together. So I just want to take a pause to return to the present moment. And if you feel comfortable, you can place both feet on the floor. Let your hands rest wherever they feel supported. And you're welcome to close your eyes or soften your gaze. And let's just take one slow breath through the nose and a gentle breath through the mouth. And again, breathing in and breathing out. And notice the feeling of the chair supporting you. Notice your feet touching the ground. You might gently name to yourself one thing you can feel in your body, one sound you can hear, or one thing in the room around you. And take one more steady breath. And whenever you're ready, you can bring your attention back to the space. And I just want to express my gratitude for taking that moment with me. And we can move into any questions that people may have, any comments that people may have in this moment. And maybe I can bring Happy into the room with me to help me with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. That is a wonderful presentation. And I appreciate that people are engaging in the chat. A lot of suggestions on how we could honor our pets. That's really good. And probably in terms of the questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat, or we could ask you to raise your hand. In the meantime, I see a question from Donna asking about Fairy. Is the place local?
Well, it's local to me. It's in Redwood Park in South Surrey.
Awesome. And I'm
Mhm.
just gonna put a link in the chat. You guys are welcome to answer a survey related to this webinar. We listen to them. In fact, like the next webinar that we will be doing is on Feb 26. It's called Understanding Maid-Related Grief. This is one of the most requested, session So hopefully you guys will take time to just answer our webinar. So I'm still opening the floor for any questions that people may have.
I also recognize that I did speed a little through this webinar, and I see that I still have like 20 minutes. I wanted to make a lot of space though for any questions. And I also recognize that there were some things that I didn't touch on in this webinar that I really wanted to, such as family dynamics and children. And I'm really hoping that that's something that in the future can be another webinar specifically on those things.
That's going to be awesome. In the meantime, while we're waiting for people to, gather their questions, we just want to remind you guys that BC Bereavement Helpline, one of our main program is to support anyone who's going through grief and loss. And so we have our helpline. The numbers are flashed in your screen. You can also visit us in our website, bcbh.ca. As Dawn mentioned, we are going to be relaunching our pet loss peer support group. And so you can see a QR code that you can take a screenshot of and sign up in our future or pet loss support group that's going to happen in spring. I see a hand raised from Christine. Go ahead, Christine. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I'm a social worker in a hospital in Emerge, and I just appreciate that you touched on the other social dynamics like people fleeing violence and also our unhoused or poverty-stricken folks. Um, and they come in with their animals and we don't have a place for them, and then we call who we can call, but then they're full looking after it's other pets. And but it is a really big part of when they come in. And sadly, or I don't know if it's sadly or not, but yeah, people stay in abusive relationships because they can't find a place or a transition home that will take their pet, risking their own lives. So um, this was really great for who I work with, like, and in my counseling as well. But I also just want to share that I have a companion dog. She's a trauma therapy dog, and she's with me today. Her name is Rue. Hi, Rue. Say hi. And she's taking a sip of water. But I was paired with her through PADS assistance dogs. I don't know if you guys have heard of PADS. Um, and we've been working together for 8 years. And she's retiring this year. And I'm experiencing that upcoming loss, that anticipatory grief, because I walk around the hospital with her, and if she's not with me, it's like, "Where's Rue? Where's Rue?" It's like I'm nobody, right? So, or when I'm with her. So yeah, it's going to be different when she doesn't come to work with me, for sure. So I really appreciate this for others and for myself. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine, for sharing that. And you touched on so many things, and I really appreciate you naming those things. I could talk another 2 hours just on some of what you mentioned.
Okay, I see Maddie's hand is raised. Go ahead, Maddie.
Hi. Um, I thought this webinar was really great. I lost my childhood dog about 6 years ago, so there's been a lot of time, and I've actually gotten to the point where I have a new dog. She's filling a lot of those gaps, but there's always that leftover from, your childhood dog. Um, when I lost her, it was very complicated because um it kind of came out of nowhere. We always thought like she was like not completely out of nowhere because she was like 15 years old, and my mom was warning me about it since she was 12 years old that like it's going to happen at some point, but we just weren't expecting cancer to be part of it. Um, and there was just so much. The complicated part for me was shortly after losing my dog, I lost my grandfather, and I had so many conflicting emotions around that because I felt like I missed her more than my grandfather. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, it it made the grieving part like process harder. And having you point out that like sometimes that does happen, like there's more grief because like she was part of my everyday. That's a huge factor. So I really appreciate you guys touching on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maddie, and I really appreciate that. And it's exactly how I felt. I had lost my mom and my grandmother in the same year, and then Reese, my dog, and I was like, why does this hurt so much more, right? And feeling so many different emotions around that alone, and there's so many reasons why, and I mentioned a few here. I think the way that I made meaning around it was that Reese was there every single day with me, and I didn't live with my mom or my grandma, and it was really easy to just not think that they were gone. Whereas because I didn't have reminders like I did for Reese, and and I think that that was kind of contributing to why it felt like it hurt so much more because it was unavoidable. I had no choice but to think about it because she was not here, right? Yeah. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for joining us, Maddie, and thank you for that, Dawn. I just want to remind everybody that BC Bereavement Helpline is open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mondays through Fridays. So feel free to call us if you need someone to speak with, especially if you feel like you're a little bit isolated with your grief. We are here for you. There's another question in the chat. Are there any tips to find therapists, counselors who best understand pet grief? Brent, thank you for sharing our website. And Don, do you have any more information you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I know that our pet loss webpage has some resources, and we are in the middle of updating it to make it make have more resources on there. Um, and so what's already on there though, I would recommend checking out. And yeah, that's my best recommendation off the top of my head right now, because there is a list there.
Also, like if you are part of BC Bereavement Helpline members, depending on the tier that you have signed up for, there's an option in our website where you could list your events. And this is something that we provide for free to some of our tier, depending on the membership. So feel free to explore that, see if that is something that you wanted to, sign up for. Yeah, with just a minimal fee to support the program that we do. Okay, there's something in the chat. Okay, so Anisha, I see that you're just sharing. There's no question in here. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, do you have any more questions from anyone?
Just quickly, I think that was brilliant to get a photo shoot. I'm gonna go do a
Yeah.
photo shoot. Yeah, I
Yes,
love it.
highly recommend. Highly recommend. I'm gonna be getting. I have a dog and a cat now too, and I'm gonna be getting a photo shoot done with my dog in February, and I'm incredibly excited and also overwhelmed because she is a very highly energetic breed. So, but I know that the pictures will turn out so well, and I when I got the photo shoot done with Reese, I just did it because I wanted to do it. And then when we had to say goodbye to her, I was so like I had no idea how meaningful those photos were going to be. And I just that's one of the biggest recommendations I have, just get as many photos and videos of them as you can.
That's good. Donna, go ahead.
Hi there. I wanted to reach out and thank whoever I was emailing today and for all the support that this individual gave me, and also mentioned about this webinar tonight, and that's the reason I'm here. So I guess it's not necessarily a question that I have, perhaps just a bit of an outline what I'm experiencing. So my heart dog Diesel passed away at the age of 13 in 2022, and he was of a bully breed, so I certainly advocate for the bully breeds and have done that for a number of years. And I shared with him prior to him passing that I would reach out and rescue another one in need. And I did that. And that was actually 2 weeks later, which I was going to be doing. And it didn't really matter time span wise. Span wise. And I guess what I'm saying is I guess really didn't grieve him, and then got a new dog in that 2 weeks after him passing. So the dog that I got afterwards was another bully breed, and both of these dogs, Diesel and Jackson, were either neglected, abandoned, or a cruelty neglect case. So Jackson, I've had for the past 3 and a bit years, and basically when you get a new dog, you don't necessarily want them to be the replacement dog, but also giving you that loving care and companionship and moving forward with taking care of this other pet. So Jackson, basically from the get-go, was riddled with anxiety and stress and triggers and reactivity, and it increased in time. It wasn't apparent when I did get him, just little minor incidences to the point where it was somewhat debilitating. So I've basically advocated for him for this past 3 years with medications that never worked, vets, behaviorists, vet visits, looking at whether it was pain or allergies, that sort of thing. So make a long story short is I had to look at the option of behavioral euthanasia because nothing was working for him. And I had also reached out to a reputable bully rescue at the same time as I was thinking of behavioral euthanasia. And of course, that is also somewhat of a stigma because it wasn't because of a aggressive, vicious, red zone dog that you would normally hear of for a behavioral euthanasia case. My dog was extremely, as I said, debilitated with stress and anxiety and emotional wellness issues. So of course you got that stigma of people frowning upon that, so you didn't share that with individuals. So again, I reached out to this rescue, and with being very busy and whatnot, I didn't hear back from them for quite a while. But when I did, they did accept my boy Jackson, and then it took a long time to have them find an appropriate foster and environment change for him. So where I'm at now is my dog did go into foster, and he has now been posted for an adoption. So I am dealing with that living grief situation that is overwhelming, and I can't let go of that. My dog is gone. He is not mine any longer. Somebody else has my family member, and I also see on said rescue page that he's posted, and individuals are commenting and applying for adopting. I guess backing up a little bit to share that he has been doing much better, and I'm in a condo in a very busy environment, so that enhanced his stress and anxiety and triggers. So where he's at now, my understanding is he is in a house with a yard and a very quiet neighborhood, so he's had time to decompress. His medications have been weaned down, and it's like he's a changed dog. So there's tons of grief, there's tons of shame that I didn't give him enough of what he needed, or I couldn't give him what he needed in regards to a changed environment. So there's all of this going through my system, and understandably, a lot of these rescues, they can't be giving you a lot of information out. There's confidentiality, privacy, and whatnot. And there's a big chunk of everything missing. There's a loss of control, loss of my animal, also thinking who else is going to be taking him, who else will be doing absolutely everything what I've done for him with just regular husbandry, uh, insurance, making sure that he gets his flea and tick, and just the littlest items that just is inundating me, and I no longer have him in my life. Somebody else will be having this wonderful dog. And also seeing comments like, this sweet dog, you know, pray that he finds a wonderful home and whatnot. And while he did have a wonderful home, I just had to make that horrific decision to let him go, so he might be able to have a better life with less struggles. And the fact that he is doing much better, and when he was with me, it was horrific, to the point where I'm having trauma responses, I'm triggered, I'm heightened. Of course, this whole entire time I've had him, my wellness was compromised as well, because what he was experiencing, I was experiencing as well, because I had to be vigilantly 24/7 on guard to be on top of his emotions. So I guess that's kind of a bit of my story in a nutshell, a lengthy nutshell. But
Yeah,
yes, yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say thank you so much for sharing, and you touched on so many different things, and I just want to point out that I did forget to put in here that, behavioral euthanasia does occur, and it is an incredibly hard decision to have to make. And I mean, I can't even imagine, how hard it must have been to have been looking at that route, and then to choose a different route, and then to experience all of these other complex emotions. And I just want to recognize and acknowledge that that is a lot. And all of those feelings are totally valid. And that guilt and that shame and that identity piece, like, there's a lot of layers, and I just really appreciate you sharing, Donna, with all of us your story and about Jackson. And I think like I see one more hand raised, and so I'd like to have, I believe Gina is, yep. Okay, if you go on to share, and then we'll wrap things up because it is 8 o'clock.
I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing, Donna. That resonated for me so much. I have two dogs with me right now. One is my own, and the other is my partner's. And I have worked as a dog handler, specifically with reactive dogs and working dogs. And I have a question, but I'll just stay a bit about my story. I'll try to be quick, but I was working in a place in Squamish that was like a dog sanctuary where we had all kinds of breeds, all types of dogs, free off leash, free range. They were coming in for daycare or boarding, and that place shut down a couple years ago. And ever since then, the clients still, I work with these clients who I used to have at this place called the Ranch. They now have no place to bring their dog to, and these are reactive or dogs with behavioral issues or just really intense dogs who really just needed an outlet. And so a lot of my clients are struggling with similar situations. They don't have the land to support their pet. They don't have the option, and I really appreciate hearing your story, because I know the guilt and shame that you speak of and the moral pain based on what my clients are telling me. And also I kind of experienced it with my own dog. And I'm doing the best I can with that. So I guess my question, thanks so much, Dawn. This was beautiful, and I appreciate everyone who's here, because it's just so cool that we have end of life workers here and we're helping each other out. But my question is, do you have recommendations for those situations, for those people, other than euthanasia? And like, basically, I have a trainer. I've had multiple trainers for my dog, but one of my trainers told me, you got to be careful trying to put them up for adoption or go to a rescue, because they won't take dogs with strikes. And my clients have dogs with 2 strikes. So it's like, I don't really know what the options are. And other than what I've suggested is, let's just keep training, like, let's go to another trainer and see if that can, if we can rehabilitate this and fix these issues. But it's not like that. It's like, these dogs literally need that outlet, and to be off leash and to be able to be free and be themselves and be away from, what I witnessed is they were away from their owners, and they were in, fenced areas and like free to be themselves. And that was huge for them. And then when they lost that, they were on a leash and now muzzled and then like restricted, and it was like there's no more freedom, and now they're reacting even more. So yeah, I just want to know if you have any recommendations. And like, I know of some sanctuaries online. I see it on Instagram, like, oh, dog sanctuaries, but like, I don't know of any local. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'll quickly just speak to that. I personally, like off the top of my head, cannot name any resources on this particular piece. I see Donna raised their hand again. I don't know if you'd like to speak to this, but I also am very aware of time.
I will just quickly speak on this, Gina. Of course, my dog being reactive, I reached out to absolutely every avenues that I could think of. Continue on with training for your clients if they've reached out to sniff spots, renting spots within the Lower Mainland or wherever yeah, you said you're from Squamish area, sniff spots so the dogs can run freely and have some decompression time with that. I know in my area in the Tri-Cities, trainers have reactivity groups. So all of the dogs are pretty are reactive and have some behavior issues. So of course, signing up to those reactive groups that they can have trainers there to work through with their clients and the reactivity. Yeah, there was one more point that I was going to point on, but now I can't remember. But hopefully that might be some thoughts for you.
Yeah, thank
you.
you so much, Donna, for sharing that.
Thank you.
I think at this point, Dawn, we could wrap up the webinar. I just want to appreciate everyone who's here. Thank you for staying with us. We're 6 minutes past 8. Thank you so much, Dawn, for gracing us with your presence as well. And again, I just want to reiterate that BC Bereavement Helpline is here for you guys, especially if you are supporting or going through grief and loss yourself. So feel free to reach out to us. But other than that, I hope that you take care of yourself and have a good night. I'll see you in our next webinar, Feb 26. Again, the webinar is MAID-related, understanding MAID-related grief. So hopefully if that is something that resonates with you or you know someone who would benefit from that webinar, feel free to, share our contacts to them. Thank you again. Have a great day or have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.